The morning I found out, I was standing in the break room of the hospital, still in my scrubs, holding a lukewarm cup of coffee I hadn't touched. My phone lit up with a photo my aunt had posted. My sister, in a white gown, laughing at a venue I didn't recognize. The caption read, "So proud to be here for our beautiful girl's engagement party. Family is everything." I wasn't invited. I stood there for a long moment. The coffee went completely cold. A nurse walked past me, said something about a patient in room 4, and I nodded and followed her because that was what I did. I kept moving. I always kept moving. My name is Claire. I'm 31 years old. I'm an emergency medicine physician at a hospital in Charlotte, North Carolina. I have worked every holiday for the last 4 years, missed my own birthday twice because of double shifts, and driven 4 hours to my hometown with a trunk full of groceries every time my mother called and said things were tight. I have co-signed loans. I have paid down credit card balances that weren't mine. I have wired money at midnight because my sister texted emergency without any other context, and I never once asked for it back. And I was not invited to her engagement party. My sister's name is Vanessa. She is 28, 3 years younger than me, and she has always been the one my parents looked at the way people look at something they're afraid to lose. I don't say that with bitterness anymore. I used to. For a long time, I turned that feeling over in my hands every night until it was smooth and familiar. Like a stone I'd carried so long, I forgot it was heavy. But somewhere in my late 20s, between my residency and my first real attending position, I stopped being angry about it and started just being tired. The way it worked in our house was simple. Vanessa felt things loudly, and so her feelings were real. I felt things quietly, and so my feelings were optional. When Vanessa cried, my mother held her. When I cried, my mother told me I was too sensitive. When Vanessa failed her real estate licensing exam twice, my parents took her to dinner and told her she just needed more time. When I got into medical school, my father said, "Just don't let it go to your head." I did not let it go to my head. I let it go to my loan balance, which was, at that point in my life, a number I could only look at sideways. The engagement party was on a Saturday in April. I know this because my mother called me on a Thursday not to invite me, but to ask if I could Venmo her $300 for flowers. She said Vanessa's venue coordinator needed a deposit. Of course, I said, because that was the answer. That was always the answer. "You're such a good sister," my mother told me. I sent the money. I did not ask about the party. I was not going to ask about the party. But my aunt's post was public, and my aunt tagged 14 people, and not one of those people was me. I called my mother that Sunday evening, after a 12-hour shift. I had changed out of my scrubs in the hospital parking garage and sat in my car for a few minutes before driving home, the way I sometimes did when I needed to remember that my life existed outside those walls. "I saw the photos," I said. There was a pause. The particular kind of pause that means someone is deciding which version of a story to tell. "We kept it small," my mother said. "Vanessa just wanted close family. I'm her sister. You know how you get, Claire. You would have been tired from work, and Vanessa didn't want any stress." It was a happy day. I didn't say anything for a moment. I was looking at the parking garage wall, at a yellow paint stripe someone had put there to mark a column, and I was thinking about the word stress. I was thinking about how, in my family's language, stress meant Claire, that somewhere along the way my presence had become synonymous with complication, even though the only thing I had ever done was show up and pay for things. "Okay," I said. "Don't be dramatic," my mother said. "I'm not being dramatic," I said. I said okay. And then I drove home. I made dinner. I went to sleep. But something had shifted, not dramatically, not like a door slamming, more like a window that had been painted shut for years, and had finally, on this particular evening, cracked open just enough for air to come through. His name is Daniel. I had been seeing him for almost 2 years by that point, and my family had met him exactly once, at Christmas the previous year, when my mother spent the evening asking Vanessa about her boyfriend Marcus, and my father fell asleep in the recliner before dessert. Daniel sat next to me at the dinner table and refilled my water glass without being asked, and later, in the car, did not make me explain what it was like to grow up in that house. He already understood, because he had been listening to me for long enough. Daniel is an architect. He designs buildings, mostly commercial, some residential, and he is very good at it in the way that people who are genuinely passionate about their work are good at it, not performatively, not for recognition, but because the work itself is something he loves. He is also, and this is something he has never once led with, the son of a man who built one of the largest real estate development firms on the East Coast. His family's name is on 3 buildings in downtown Charlotte. He grew up in a house with a name, not a number, and he has never once made me feel like that meant anything about the distance between us. I told him about the engagement party on a Sunday night, sitting on the kitchen floor of my apartment because we'd been cooking, and the kitchen floor had somehow become the place we ended up when the conversation turned serious. He listened. He did not rush to fix it. He asked me one question, which was, "What do you want to do?" I had not been asked that in a while. I thought about it for longer than the question probably required. "I want to stop being the person who gets thanked and then forgotten," I said. He nodded. "Okay, then let's figure out what that looks like." We were married 6 weeks later. I want to be clear that we had already been talking about it. The engagement was not a reaction. The ring had been sitting in Daniel's desk drawer for 11 days before the parking garage phone call, because he had been waiting, he told me later, for a weekend when neither of us was exhausted. What changed after that Sunday was not our plan. What changed was my willingness to do it without telling my family first. We got married on a Friday morning in May, at the courthouse, with 2 of my colleagues as witnesses. I wore a cream-colored dress I had bought on a Tuesday, after a short shift. Daniel wore a dark suit and looked at me the way he always looked at me, which was like he had decided. And the decision was permanent, and that was simply the end of it. We signed the paperwork. We went to lunch at a restaurant we both loved. We ordered the good wine. I did not post anything. I did not call my mother. I went back to work on Saturday. 2 weeks later, Daniel's parents hosted a dinner. They did this every few months, a small gathering, 12 or 15 people, at their house in Myers Park, which had high ceilings and a garden that Daniel's mother had been cultivating for 20 years. I had been to 3 of these dinners before. I knew the rhythm of them. Good food, good conversation, people who asked follow-up questions and actually listened to the answers. This time, I was introduced as Daniel's wife. I watched it move through the room the way news moves through a small space quietly, then not quietly. His mother embraced me and held on for a moment longer than usual. His father shook my hand, and then, apparently reconsidering, hugged me instead. Someone made a toast. Someone else said we needed a real celebration. 3 days later, Daniel's mother, a woman named Patricia who sits on 2 nonprofit boards and has a talent for logistics that I deeply respect, began planning a reception. Nothing extravagant, she said. Just something proper. A celebration at their house, 60 guests in July. I said yes. I helped plan it. I chose flowers and a menu and a playlist that started with something slow and ended with something that made people want to stay. And then I did something I had not planned to do, but that felt, when I did it, like the most natural thing in the world. I called Vanessa, not to invite her. Not yet. I called her to tell her, simply, that I had gotten married. I thought she deserved to hear it from me. I thought that was the right thing. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "You got married without telling us?" "Yes. Mom is going to be devastated." "I know. Why would you do that? This is so selfish, Claire. This is so like you." I held the phone and listened to her tell me that I had made her engagement period about myself, that I had stolen attention from her upcoming wedding, that I always did this, found some way to make everything about me. I listened to the full shape of it. I did not interrupt. And when she was finished, I said, "I hope your wedding is beautiful, Vanessa," and I ended the call. My mother called 40 minutes later, then my father, then my aunt, whose public post had started all of this. I let them go to voicemail. I listened to each one later, at a time of my choosing, the way you read a letter instead of opening the door. The messages ranged from hurt to accusatory to, in my mother's 3rd voicemail, something that was almost conciliatory, almost. She said I should have told them. She said they were family. She did not say she was sorry I hadn't been invited to the party. She did not say she was sorry about the flowers, money, or the loan cosigns, or the years of showing up without being seen. I did not call back. The reception was on a Saturday in July. The garden was in full bloom. Patricia had strung lights through the trees and hired a string quartet for the first 2 hours, and the food was exactly what I had asked for, which was simple and abundant and the kind of thing people eat slowly because they're enjoying themselves too much to rush. 60 people came. Daniel's college roommates flew in from Seattle and Boston. My 2 attending colleagues who had been our witnesses were there, and they danced until 11. Someone took a photo of Daniel and me standing in the garden, under the lights, his arm around my shoulders, both of us laughing at something I can no longer remember. It was unposed and slightly blurry, and it was the best photograph anyone has ever taken of me. My colleague posted it to her Instagram. She tagged me and Daniel. She wrote 4 words, "The real love story." I did not post it myself, I didn't need to. By Sunday morning, 11 people had sent it to my mother. She called me 4 times before noon. I let them go to voicemail, and then, because I had learned something important about choosing when to open doors, I listened to them in order. The first was confused. She had seen the photo. Who were all these people? Where was this? Was this a party? Was this a wedding reception? The second was hurt. How could I do this? How could I celebrate without them? Did I think about how this made Vanessa feel, with her wedding coming up in September? The third was something I had waited 31 years to hear and had stopped expecting. Her voice was quieter. She said, "I think we've hurt you. I think we haven't paid attention in the right ways." I'm not sure when that started. The fourth was just her saying my name. Twice. And then silence. And then she hung up. I sat with those voicemails for a few days. I played them while I was making coffee, while I was driving to the hospital, once at 2 in the morning when I woke up and couldn't get back to sleep. I was not trying to decide how angry to be. I was past the point where anger was the main thing. I was trying to decide what I actually wanted. What I wanted, I realized, was not an apology, exactly. What I wanted was accuracy. I wanted my mother to be accurate about what had happened, not just in the last few weeks, but over the course of a lifetime. I wanted someone in that family to say, "We used you as a resource, and we did not treat you like a person, and we knew it, and we did it anyway, and that was wrong." That is a very specific thing to want. It is also, I have come to understand, a thing that some families are never capable of giving. I called my mother back on a Wednesday evening, 9 days after the reception. I told her I was happy. I told her that Daniel was a good man, and that his family had welcomed me with a generosity I was still learning how to receive. I told her that I had not planned any of this as a statement, that the marriage and the reception were not performances, they were simply my life, moving forward. And then I told her the truth about why I hadn't told them. I said, "The weekend of your daughter's engagement party, which I paid for flowers for, I was looking at a photo my aunt posted publicly on a day when I was not welcome in the same room." I said, "That was not the first time." I said, "I have been the person who funds things and gets thanked and then stays home for as long as I can remember, and somewhere along the way I stopped believing that telling you things would change anything." My mother was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "I didn't realize it was that bad." "I know," I said. "That's part of what I'm telling you." We did not resolve everything in that phone call. We are not resolved now. My mother and I speak once a week, short calls, careful ones. Vanessa and I have not spoken since the phone call in June. She got married in September. I was not there. I was not invited, and this time I did not send money. What I did instead was work a Saturday shift, which I had volunteered for, and then meet Daniel for dinner at the restaurant where we'd had our wedding lunch. We sat at the same table and ordered the same wine, and I looked at him across the table and I thought about what it means to build something. He designs buildings. He understands, professionally and personally, that the foundation is not the dramatic part. Nobody takes photographs of the foundation, but the foundation is what everything else stands on. I am still learning that I am allowed to build on solid ground, that the chair at the table doesn't need to be offered to me, that I can simply sit down. I do not consider what happened a revenge story. I have heard it called that. My colleague who took the photograph called it that, laughing, not unkindly, but revenge implies that the point was their pain. The point was never their pain. The point was mine, my dinner, my husband, my lights in the trees and my string quartet and 60 people who stood up and raised a glass because I had married someone who looked at me like the decision was permanent. The point was that for the first time in my life, I was not the one waiting to be included. I included myself. And that, it turns out, was the whole thing. That was all it ever needed to be. If you've ever been the person in your family who gives and stands outside, looking in at your own reflection in a window, I want you to know that I see you. I know what it's like to wire money at midnight for someone who won't think about you in the morning. I know what it's like to hear "you're so reliable" said in a tone that means you're so useful. I know what it's like to wonder, quietly, in the break room of a hospital, while your coffee goes cold, whether the people who are supposed to love you actually do. You are allowed to find out. You are allowed to build something that has nothing to do with their approval. You are allowed to sit down at the table without asking if there's room. There is room. There was always room. You just have to stop waiting for someone else to pull out the chair.